All right, here we go. Caligula and Claudius, as I call this madness and conquest. Madness for Caligula and conquest for Claudius. And so this is the story of the continuation of the Roman Empire as we started last lecture, right? Augustus was our first emperor. Then we had Tiberius, who I didn't really say much about. And then he's going to be followed by Caligula and then Claudius. Again, remember, this is all the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So it's all from, they're all related in some way. They're not necessarily father-son, but they're all related. And so, what's the deal with these two guys, and why are they important to study? And we're going to talk a little bit about them in this short lecture here. This is one that a lot of students enjoy because some of the stories are a bit out there. But in the case of Claudius, he's going to do some pretty important things actually, and we're going to definitely talk about that as well. So, you want to know both of them, and we're going to go to our first slide and just kind of start getting into this a bit. So Caligula, he's very young when he comes into power. I believe he's in his 20s, and he comes into power at the year 37 AD. As you can see from his reign, he doesn't rule for that long. He's only emperor for a few years, and it's, obviously he's got this reputation, and 1,000 days of terror and so forth. And a lot of the reputation is very just, but I will say this from a historical standpoint, there's also some of the stories that have probably been a bit exaggerated. One of the primary sources we use to discuss Caligula and a lot of these rulers is a man named Suetonius. And Suetonius is a Roman historian, and he could, be a little bit exaggerated in some of his accounts, apparently. And so, what I'm going to tell you about Caligula, is interesting. These are stories that we have accounts of. Could some of it be exaggerated a bit? Sure, but overall, it's very clear this guy was not operating with a full deck of cards, right? And so the story is that the first year of his reign was things were pretty calm, Caligula. But then about a year in, really started to behave in some incredibly odd ways and inappropriate ways in any respect for a leader, undignified ways for a leader. So he would obviously treat the senators with very little respect. I think I remember once reading an account that he would make the senators, dress like slaves and, worship him as a god. That was something he wanted to be. And yes, a lot of the Roman emperors were deified, but they tend to be deified after they died. He wanted to be a god while he was still alive. Other stories of Caligula is he just had tremendous amount of money, of course. He's emperor, and what is he going to use this money on? Well, baths and perfumes and banquets and parties and just this kind of crazy, outlandish ways of behaving. There's a story that he wanted to appoint his horse as a senator. I don't think he actually ever did that, but he was something he planned on doing. So I don't know, that would be kind of odd having a horse as one of the senators. Stories about his cruelty, that he would, force parents to watch their children be executed, or that during like the hottest times of the day during the games, he would remove the canopy. So let's say there was a gladiator games and there was an arena and there were canopies there to keep people cool, that during the hottest times of the day he would remove the canopies just because he thought it was funny. So he did these things because he thought were funny. That was his kind of sixth sense of humor. One other account is he would like meet his wife and he would kiss her on the neck, and then in a public place he would very loudly proclaim, "And this beautiful throat I can cut whenever I please." So just kind of these behaviors that are very cruel and just again out there. There was a movie made about Caligula many, many years ago in the 70s. It is a very, very strange movie, not for kids at all. I believe it actually received an X rating because it was just so brutally graphic. And it kind of showed the way Caligula did things. Again, definitely not appropriate for children. But his reign continued on. Another thing he tried to do, he says, "I want to invade Britain and conquer Britain." So the story is that he organizes his men to go and conquer Britain, and then instead of actually conquering Britain, he starts to give the orders for his men to collect seashells. So there you have the Roman legions collecting seashells. That he declared war on the sea and all these kind of odd things he did. There are stories that he had ancestral affairs with his sister. Again, that one is one of those that may have been exaggerated in history. So, there's perception and there's the reality. And there's just the reality is Caligula was behaving in erratic ways. And there are some psychologists who have studied Caligula and actually pondered if Caligula had what we would call today a mental illness. And, think about it today. If somebody has a mental illness today, there's, you go get treatment. Just like you have a physical illness, you go get treatment. You have a mental illness, you go get treatment. And if you get it treated, you can function well and so forth. But if you don't get it treated and you have something like extreme bipolar or whatever it is, then and you're emperor and you're young and with a lot of power, you tend to kind of do some things you shouldn't be doing. So what eventually happens to Caligula? Well, not a surprise, he's going to eventually be assassinated. He upsets enough people, he's going to be assassinated, and you go, well, I thought this was the Pax Romana, because remember in the previous lecture I talked about, hey, there's the Pax Romana, Roman peace. Well, it doesn't degrade into a full massive civil war after this because nobody really liked Caligula at this point. And so the transition, it goes to Claudius, who I believe was his uncle, and so Claudius comes in and takes over next. So what's up with Claudius? So Claudius, he rules from 41 to 54 AD, and the story of Claudius is not as out there as Caligula, but very significant. Claudius is said to have a little bit of a birth defect, that he didn't walk well, he spoke with a bit of a stutter, and he was often described not as being very charismatic. And, this is interesting because in terms of his personal life, we see how this is going to affect him, and we're going to kind of get to that in a second. But he's going to have a number of accomplishments, and then I'll talk about his personal life as well and how that's going to be important. So one of the big accomplishments of Claudius, I want you to know, is that he builds a lot of infrastructure, right? When you think of Roman engineering, the roads, canals, buildings, aqueducts, a lot of this is Claudius. He's given a lot of credit for that, for building the aqueducts and building other infrastructure for Rome. Another one of his great achievements, he's going to do something that nobody else in Rome had been able to do. Caesar couldn't do it. Augustus couldn't do it. None of the other Roman emperors couldn't do it. He's actually going to conquer Britain. And he adds Britain, as you can see here on our map now, Britain is going to be part of the Roman Empire now. In fact, he's so proud of this that he names his son Britannicus. So Britannicus is his son. You're going to want to remember his name. He does all these things. He conquers Britain. He's building the infrastructure. But his personal life story is also fascinating. So he's going to be married multiple times. He marries women, and then he kind of discovers, this woman doesn't really love me. I'm not going to go through all his wives, but I believe it was his third wife, Messalina, who married him, and she was much younger than him. She gets married to him. And Claudius starts to sort out that she only married him for power, that she wanted to get her family in power of Rome instead of him, and eventually this leads to her assassination. And he's like, I'm done, I don't want any more women, I'm finished with this. And then he meets Agrippina, or doesn't meet, he already knew Agrippina or Agrippina, I've heard her name pronounced a couple ways. And she's an interesting woman because she's going to marry Claudius as well. And that's going to be his last wife. Now, follow me on this. When you have an emperor, when the emperor dies, who takes over? Well, the son, assuming you have a son. And in 54 AD, when Claudius dies, he does have a son, Britannicus, who's a young boy, but he's still, the heir to the throne. And I want to ask you guys if any of you ever heard of the Roman Emperor Britannicus at this time, and the answer should be no, because Britannicus never became emperor. And the question is, why did Britannicus never become emperor? Well, that all has to do with Agrippina, or Agrippina again. And so this last wife of Claudius, before she was married to Augustus, before she was married to Claudius, had a son of her own. Who is the son of Agrippina? A man named Nero. And so maybe some of you, of course, have heard of Nero, right? And Nero is going to be the next emperor. So the question is, how is Miss Agrippina going to pull this off? How is she going to make it that Britannicus does not become the son, but instead the emperor, but instead of Britannicus, her own son Nero will become the next emperor? And so that's a story for another lecture. Actually, in my history courses, I have a documentary that I'm going to have you guys watch on Nero, and it kind of covers that. So you'll be watching that in the documentary, but it's a pretty cool little story. All right, so I hope all that is clear. And so those are going to be the Julia Claudians, right? So you have to know all of them. Augustus, Tiberius, you have Caligula, you have Claudius, you have Nero. I'm not doing a lecture of Nero on my classes. For my classes, you have the documentary you're going to watch on Nero and take some notes on that. And that's it. And so, just kind of keep watching this stuff. If you have any questions, let me know, and then we'll go from there. All right. Thank you, everyone.